Hello, everybody. My name is Martha Alter Hines, Living the One Light. So today in this video, I'm going to make a kind of a video that a lot of astrologers make that I have never made before, that I have shied away from, and I'm going to try it out. And I would love for you to tell me if this is helpful, not helpful, what feels helpful about it, and what doesn't. But I'm going to do it in a slightly different way, of course, than the typical way, because I'll do it my way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drop into the dance of that's going on right now and into next year of Jupiter, Saturn, and the nodes of the moon. Because there's some really fascinating things going on with the dance of these three entities, I guess you could say. And I'm going to go through this in detail, and then I might do this all in one video, or we'll see how much time the first part takes, and then maybe I'll make a second video, but I'll also go through the houses. Depending on your rising sign, I'll show you how these energies might play out differently for you. So on a basic level, what I'm going to be looking at is the fact that we currently have, and we will be having all the way until June of 2025, a long-standing square between Saturn and Jupiter. Saturn is in Pisces and Jupiter is in Gemini, and they are squaring each other exactly 3 times total. But even when they're not in that exact square, they're in this square dance. And at the same time, we have the nodes of the moon in their last degrees right now of Aries and Libra. And so the third of the Jupiter-Saturn squares is going to be on June 15th, 2025 at 1 degree of Cancer and Aries. So right now, Jupiter and Saturn are in the mutable signs of Gemini and Pisces doing their first 2 squares with the nodes in Aries and Libra. But next year, in 2025, Jupiter and Saturn will do their final third square in Aries and Cancer, with the nodes having switched into Pisces and Virgo. Okay, so, and in the meantime, the north node of the moon will meet Saturn in Pisces. So there's this whole really interesting dance going on between Saturn and Jupiter, but also when we bring in the nodes, it's a really, really fascinating dance. So I'm going to break it down, and I'm going to slightly simplify things a little bit, just to say that the reason I have never made a video like this before is because you can't generalize. You just can't, really. When it comes to looking at, like, when lots of astrologers do these videos of, Saturn through the houses or Jupiter transiting through the houses, which I appreciate, and actually I've gotten a lot out of myself by watching them on a certain level. But when I look at a chart, of course, even if, let's say, Jupiter is in your 3rd house, it's therefore impacting your 3rd house, but it's also probably impacting all kinds of other things in your chart that I wouldn't know just by knowing your rising sign, right? Like, it might be conjunct your sun, it might be opposite your Venus, it might be squaring your nose, it might be all kinds of other things. So I'm going to do this video, but with the major caveat that I'm seriously simplifying in order to do that. But the reason I'm for some reason I'm feeling called to do it anyway. And I think part of that is because there is, in this general sense, a fascinating dance going on right now in the mutable signs, specifically Gemini and Pisces, between these energies of Saturn and Jupiter. But then when we bring in the nodes will also transit those same degrees of the second half of the mutable signs in 2025. And at the end of 2024, the North Node will be transiting the end degrees of Aries, which is exactly where Jupiter and Saturn will do their third square. Okay. It's complicated, but anyway, so I want to drop into what are the general themes that we can sort of universalize about this dance going on. And again, with the caveat that I can't know for sure, like, what does that mean for your chart? We'd have to do a reading, or you'd have to look at your own chart. But I think there are some really interesting themes right now and coming up that I think we collectively can feel into, and I would love to know your thoughts. Okay, so first, let's drop into just what is Jupiter, and then we'll say what is Saturn and what are the nodes, right? And Chris Skidmore and I already did a whole video just on Jupiter in Gemini in general. You can go back and listen to that he gives a whole, his whole perspective. That video is mostly him talking, me very enraptured listening, but he'd made some really beautiful points. And so he has a whole perspective on it that definitely I recommend. Okay, so let's start with what is Jupiter? Okay, so Jupiter in general, typically in astrology, is thought of stereotypically as having, it expands things. So when Jupiter is transiting some part of your chart, chances are pretty high that in some way that area of your life is going to be getting attention, getting expansion. Like for me, Jupiter just has been going over my midheaven and first it was transiting my 9th house. And then it went over my midheaven. Now it's in my 10th house, and it's going to go back. The day I'm recording this video, actually October 9th, today, Jupiter went retrograde at 21 degrees of Gemini. I'm going to give you all these dates in a second of all these retrogrades and directs and all of that. But so for me, Jupiter just went retrograde in my 10th house, and it'll go back over my midheaven and cross back into my 9th house just a tiny bit, and then go direct. It's going to go direct at 11 degrees of Gemini on February 4th, I think it is, 2025. And so you can, like, in my life, I mean, this isn't necessarily what happens when Jupiter is in that part of your chart, but for me, it's pretty definitely my midheaven, how I'm showing up in the world is definitely expanding. Definitely, I'm doing a lot of public speaking and all of that. That totally fits with Jupiter in Gemini crossing my midheaven, right? But I just want to, so that's a stereotype of Jupiter, and Jupiter also has to do with, so many other things, including our belief systems and how we make sense of things in the world and all kinds of things related to that. Jupiter also can be an energy that sort of frees things up for us to expand into all of who we really are. But I just want to just throw in this one little other thing, which I'm not going to get into in detail here, but I just want to just throw in food for thought if this happens to speak to you. Something that I've talked about in other videos that we did in my astrology course this year, when we've been focusing on Jupiter, we talked about Jupiter as the reality that Jupiter is not just a dot in the sky, of course, right? Jupiter is actually an entire system in and of itself. So astronomers call Jupiter the jovial system. Jove is another word for Jupiter. And Jupiter, in a sense, is its own mini solar system. So Jupiter, astronomically, scientifically, it is made of gases that are thought of actually as being from the sun. So it is, in a sense, like a mini sun. And it has a huge number of moons, including 4 moons, which are very, very large. And its largest moon, I think, is bigger than Mercury. It's very big. It's like it could be a planet. but it's a moon of a planet. And the first 4 moons of Jupiter actually mirror, in terms of the ratio of their size and their spacing with each other, they mirror the first planets of our solar system. So you can actually think of Jupiter as the jovial system, as its own like mega world. I mean, and Jupiter is gigantic, right? It's a gas giant. It's humongous. It's the biggest planet in our solar system. And it really, in a sense, is like a mini solar system. So I just want to throw that out there, is that if you feel called to, wherever Jupiter happens to be transiting in your chart and where it was the moment you were born, I personally would love, over time, just feel into this reality that it's not just this dot in the sky. It's a massive gas giant made of same substance as our sun, with its own kind of mini solar system. That's really fascinating. And that's really different, right, than if you think of, let's say, Mercury, which is a little planet that's a rocky planet. It's a very different kind of being than Jupiter. Yeah, so it's its own system, right? And that's what's in moving through the sky, moving through the solar system, as that's what we're in relationship with when we're talking about Jupiter. Okay. Okay, so then what is Saturn? So Saturn often gets a bad reputation. Jupiter is considered a good planet, and Saturn's often considered a bad planet, and I don't agree with those ways of thinking. So Saturn typically is thought of as being related to kind of the opposite of Jupiter. Jupiter expands, Saturn contracts, right? That's the stereotype, and it's partly true, I think. But on a deeper level, why do we consider Saturn having to do with contraction? I think that's often because in our society, in our world, we are encouraged to expand. We are encouraged to go fast. And so I don't think of Saturn actually as being about contraction or slowing down, but it often is associated with those energies because we are trained to and expected to go big and fast. So Saturn actually, for me, is about wisdom. It's about us, the deep wisdom that we are. And it's about slowing down enough, if we need to slow down, in order so we can regroup and come back deeply into our own wisdom. And then click with the rhythm that's actually in alignment for us, which might actually be fast, might actually be faster than we were going. You never know, right? Like sometimes if you've been really holding yourself back, you've been really just like scared to act at all. If you deeply come into your own Saturn being and find your own inner wisdom, boom, suddenly you might be off on a roll, like, but often, definitely, Saturn energy, especially Saturn going retrograde, which it is right this minute as I'm recording. Again, I'm recording this on October 9th, 2024. Certainly, often that Saturn energy can be a sense of slowing down, but it's not slowing down just to slow you down. It's slowing down to help re-anchor, find your own wisdom, your inner wisdom. So what we have going on in this year and into next year, so 2024 and 2025, we have this dance, this square between Saturn and Jupiter. So the Jupiter, which can expand things, and then Saturn, which sometimes is pulling us back to regroup and recenter, right? So the stereotypical way to think of that is like, oh no, this is a balance, this is a dance of opposites, and maybe there could be a conflict there. I don't feel it that way. I feel it actually as an incredibly amazing opportunity, especially when I look ahead to next year, when the nodes are then going to be entering the same degrees where Jupiter and Saturn are right now. Okay, in the mutable signs. So So right this minute, as I'm recording this, the north node is at 6 degrees of Aries and the south node is at 6 degrees of Libra. And the nodes go backwards. So the nodes of the moon are going to switch into the end degrees, the 29 degrees of Pisces and Virgo in January of 2025, which means that the nodes of the moon are going to transit exactly where Saturn will be at the same. In other words, Saturn and the North Node are actually going to conjunct early of 2025. So it's not just Saturn and Jupiter doing a dance. It's actually going to be also the nodes of the moon. And the nodes of the moon, especially given that the North Node will be where Saturn currently is next year, that means that wherever Saturn happens to be right now in your chart, you could think of it as actually Saturn, this deep, helping you come drop into your own deep wisdom, preparing you for when the North Node will be there next year, that same spot in your chart. Like for me, right this minute, Saturn is precisely on my sun. And a year from now, the North Node is going to be on my sun. So what does that say? Well, that's actually really cool because so right now I have Jupiter on my midheaven. This is just one example, right? I have Jupiter on my midheaven doing this expansion thing. So like lots of public speaking and lots of, midheaven stuff, like how I'm showing up in the world is expanding. But at the same time, I have Saturn right on my sun in my 7th house saying, okay, wait, that's awesome that you're getting all this exposure, bigger, view in the world, whatever. But slow down a second. You also need to come back into your own inner deep, deep wisdom. So I've been needing a lot of time to myself to really deeply feel, okay, what is actually in alignment? Like with that expansion, wherever the expansion might be happening in your life, lots of possibilities might come in or like new options or whatever, but you don't want to say yes to all of them, right? If you did, like it wouldn't work. So the Saturn is there helping to say, okay, maybe I have those options, but what is actually deeply in alignment for me? And what are my what does my wisdom say about my own boundaries, my own needs, how I want to bring structure to this in the 3D reality? So again, you could have all kinds of amazing opportunities, but if there's not a structure for it, it could just sort of do nothing, right? It could fizzle. And the Saturn energy can really help support you to make something happen for real. And then the North Node next year will be where Saturn is right now. And the North Node transiting, let's say, for example, on my sun, it's like Saturn right now is helping me get clear. Saturn is retrograde right now on my sun, helping me get really clear about, okay, what is actually deeply in alignment for me? What are my boundaries? What structures do I need to put into place so again, so Jupiter is kind of expanding things in my business, et cetera. But then Saturn is helping me take a step back and go, okay, I need to get certain business things in order, right? Like the business end of things. And, make sure I've got the taxes I'm going to pay in the right categories. And I've hired an accountant and, so to make sure that it in the 3D world can function properly. That's Saturn on my sun in my 7th house. I mean, it might have to do with relationships, but it's really also, it can be business related things in the 7th house too, which is, just interesting. And Saturn, business. Yes. All that. But then that's preparing me for, next year when the North Node will be on my sun. So where Saturn is right now, the North Node will be there next year, which the North Node being in some area of your chart often can be kind of like the collective soul or the divine, really supporting that area of you. So I would guess in a year from now, there'll be some way in which my soul is really supported to be doing the soul calling of what I'm here to, my son, right? Like how I'm meant to shine in the world will be really probably very supported at that time. But I will have done the Saturn work in the, before I get there. So that's really cool, right? Like that's awesome. If you think about this whole dance, this whole picture. Okay, so I want to show you some dates. And then I probably going to need to make this into a two-part video because time. So I want to go through the houses and talk about, if you have Aries rising, Taurus rising, blah, 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 how might this play out? But I'll probably put that into a second video. But before I end this video, let me show you some basic dates so you can just have a sense, and some basic areas of the zodiac that are highlighted in this time with the Jupiter Saturn nodes thing. Okay. So all right. So Saturn went retrograde on June 29th, 2024 at 19 degrees of Pisces. And then it's going to be going direct on November 15th, 2024. Just 4 days, actually. It's really interesting. Saturn is going to be going direct 4 days before Pluto enters Aquarius. I'm just going to, I don't have that on this chart here, but that's just something it's just dawning on me right this second, is that Saturn currently is ruling Pluto, because Pluto right now is at 29 degrees of Capricorn. Saturn is going to go direct at 12 degrees of Pisces on November 15th, and Pluto is going to enter Aquarius on November 19th. That's really interesting. Okay, just as a side note. But so one thing to say is that the areas of your chart that are particularly being highlighted by this Saturn retrograde are between 12 degrees of Pisces and 19 degrees of Pisces. That's the area that as Saturn is doing its retrograde dance this year. Then Jupiter went retrograde today, the day I'm making this video, October 9th, and it's going to go, and that was at 21 degrees of Gemini, and it'll go direct at 11 degrees of Gemini. So if you have any planets between 11 degrees of Gemini and 21 degrees of Gemini, or whatever area of your chart, that is what is going to be getting transited 3 times by Jupiter. So Jupiter is now about to do its second pass through that area of your chart, and then it'll do a third pass next year. Okay, and like I said, there are a total of 3 Jupiter-Saturn squares. The first one was on August 19th, 2024. That was an incredibly powerful day. That was a full moon in Aquarius. And it was, if you remember, the day of the Democratic National Convention in the United States. And, there's a lot going on astrologically that day, including this first Jupiter-Saturn square, which happened at 17 degrees of Gemini Jupiter, and then Saturn was at 17 degrees of Pisces. So if you have any planets near 17 degrees of Gemini, Pisces, Virgo, or Sagittarius, all of the mutable signs, though they were getting particularly highlighted by that first square. Okay, the second square is going to happen on December 24th, 2024. And that will be where Jupiter is at 14 degrees of Gemini, and Saturn will be at 14 degrees of Pisces, which is actually where it is. Saturn is currently at 14 degrees of Pisces. So as I'm making this video, Saturn between now and December 24th will have gone direct on November 15th at 12 degrees of Pisces, but it will be then back at the 14 degrees mark to do its second square with Jupiter. And then the third square will be next, this says June 19th. I thought it was June 15th. Anyway, I'm going to double check that. But anyway, middle of June 2025. And when that happens, that will be once Jupiter has entered Cancer and Saturn has entered Aries. So that square will be when Jupiter is at 1 degree of Cancer and Saturn is at 1 degree of Aries. So it's a totally different energy and, very interesting dance. So, and like I said, the nodes of the moon are going to switch into Pisces and Virgo in January of 2025. Okay, so those are some just basic dates and highlighted areas of your chart. So you can think about where in your chart are the second half, sort of like, I would say 11 degrees and up of Pisces, Gemini, Virgo, and Sagittarius. So 11 to 29 degrees of all the mutable signs are everything in your chart that is in the second, that 11 degrees and up, but actually the second 2/3 of the mutable signs will be really, really highlighted by this whole dance. And next, interestingly, in 2025, the nodes are going to enter Pisces and Virgo, but they're going to end at the very, very end of 2025 on December 31st, so New Year's Eve of 2025, they will actually be at 11 degrees of Pisces and Virgo, which is the same degree that Jupiter is going to go direct. It'll go direct at 11 of Gemini. So squaring where the nodes will be at the end of 2025. Okay. So, yeah, so for the purposes of this video, and I'll make a second video going through the houses, but I would just begin to feel into what are those areas of your, where in your chart is that second half of especially Pisces and Gemini, but also Virgo and Sagittarius. What is really highlighted? Do you have planets there? What houses, is that in? Are your nodes there? If you have your nodes in Virgo and Pisces, next year is going to be huge for you. Absolutely gigantic. Also, if you have your nodes in the beginning degrees of Libra and Aries, right now is huge for you. Absolutely huge. So if you have your nodes, kind of like 0 to 6 degrees of Libra and Aries, this is a major time for you. Okay. I hope that made sense. I hope that helps in some way. And I would love to hear your thoughts. And I will come back in the next day or two with part 2, where I go through this, but going through the houses. All right. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you soon.